So, first of all, happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July to everybody. We're starting out with Off the Rails today, on 4th of July. We're joined today by a good friend of mine, Butch, named after Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, who's celebrating the 4th of July.
Did they even like dogs?
Dogs were all over the West and the East, and
But did they like dogs?
they were more interested in robbing trains, is what they were, and that's another session we'll have another day with Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. But Butch likes trains, so we're going to leave him alone at that point. Just a little update on what's been done since our last episode. Whoops, hate to turn my back to you, but over here, our bar mills model that we started, T.J. Riley's old scale. The little small cupola at the top of the building has been completed this week. And of course, there's a lot of work to be done. So we'll go along on episodes and kind of give you a buildings series as we complete.
Mills is the one that makes all the buildings, the good buildings.
Yes, Bar Mills Scale Models up in Maine. And this one is T.J. Riley's O-Scale building. It's a master craftsman kit. It's not for beginners.
Yeah, it looks pretty involved.
It is, and this will be my 13th or 14th addition to the layout. To give you some idea, this took about 3 days to do all the work on it. It's
3 days to do just the
3
top?
days to do that.
Holy cow, man.
Well, there's a lot involved, and we're going to get
It'd
into
take you
that.
like 3 months to do the whole thing.
No, it moves along when you get to the
Holy
bigger
cow.
parts. We're not going to spend another month or 2 or 3 on it, but they do move along, but you have to take your time because some of this stuff is intricate. The more intricate it is, the more interest it has. I thought I'd spend a moment and talk about today some of the heroes of the rail. Heroes of the rail. A lot of people will say, well, who ran these trains and what kind of a person would get into railroading? Railroading was extremely dangerous, still is today. Back in the 1880s, 1890s, you had an engineer. He was in charge of the entire train. He also did repairs on trains as they rolled through the countryside. It was the engineer's job to work on the locomotive. Hard to imagine what kind of skills were involved in that. And the interesting thing, some people say, well, how did kids get involved in railroading? Well, here's a good example. Children were thrilled at the enormity of machinery on the locomotives, as you can see here. So back in the early part of the 20th century, children were absolutely incredibly amazed by the machinery, the work, and so forth. And
They probably like the noises and the bells and
the
whistles,
noise, the bells, the
whistles.
steam.
Yeah,
it was fascinating.
right.
And of course, that's where railroading really started to take off as a hobby. Children were fascinated by it. They spent a lot of time around trains, and the parents would take them. I can recall my father taking me at a very early age at the Norfolk and Western, and I saw the J engine for the first time in my life. Here you have another example of some of the heroes. You have the engineer and the conductor.
Blue Comet.
The Blue Comet ran from New Jersey to New York. It was a very famous train. And like they said in the introduction, no matter what you call them, engineers, firemen, and conductors kept the wheels of commerce turning. And so in the early part of the 20th century, rail was at a premium, both for passengers and for freight service. And a lot of people say, well, who was responsible for keeping the steam moving in the train? And here you have a good example. He's the fireman. His job was to continue to pull coal out of the tender, as you see here, to keep and stoke the fire under the boiler, which created the steam. The steam rose to the top of the boiler, was channeled down to the cylinder heads,
He doesn't look like a real fireman. He should be covered in coal dust. What's going on here? He's just an actor. That's just an actor.
No, that's the real guy. And the funny part about it is, he was probably one of the neatest firemen
his clothes are clean.
in all of America.
He's wearing a white hat. There's not a speck of coal dust on it. How is that possible?
Well, I think he was one of the first to recognize the fact that perhaps coal is not necessarily a healthy issue. But nonetheless, firemen were responsible for keeping fire and the...
I think he took the picture and then he was off
the boiler.
rest of the day.
It was a good point, though. He is rather clean, isn't he?
He's beyond clean. And he's wearing white.
And here's the engineer outside on the walkways by the boiler, adjusting one of the pressure release valves. That was his job. Pardon me?
Why is he smiling? Can't that like blow up in his face or something?
There's a lot of pressure there. Maybe he's forcing that smile. Very well could be.
He's not dirty enough either. I need more dirt on my engineers.
Okay, well, let me take a look. Let's see if we can get some dirt on the brakeman. There's your brakeman. He rides the caboose. He looks for hot boxes.
He looks like the foreman. He doesn't look like
Yeah.
the brakeman. He's just standing around waving.
Well, maybe as we go through, we'll get some dirtier folks to make it look a little better for you.
Looks like a foreman. That's what they do. They stand around and wave and just observe. They don't really do much else. They just...
Well, I guess he's setting this...
Why is that guy looking that way and this guy's looking that way?
He might be looking for a train in the opposite direction.
Oh.
You know, you don't want to get sandwiched in this thing.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, good point. Good point. They do look awful clean.
Yeah. Suspicious.
Perhaps staged by the railroad
Yes.
for publicity purposes.
Definitely.
Just a side note, Ward Kimball took this photograph.
Oh, really?
And we talked about Ward in our last segment. So Ward was all over railroading, as we already know.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I thought we'd pick up on now is, where are we going with Lionel when we leave our last episode? We were actually in the 1930s.
We saw this one. So
we did. And so as you take a look at this particular engine in the 1930s, then you go to the latter part of the 30s into 40s. This is still O scale.
Okay.
All of these are O scale. I just put this for a comparison.
Yeah.
When Lionel decided to go to die cast on the engines, of course, it added a lot of weight, but they left off a lot of the copper, brass,
detailing,
and other issues. Right. And they went to basically nickel on all of their locomotives. Now, these locomotives here are some of the more popular ones that came in sets. This is number 681, a 736.
What scale are those?
This is all O scale. Everything on the tables is O scale.
Okay, see, the dog is already creating problems here.
It is. Well, Butch was always active.
That's food in there.
Those are actually sewer tops. Sewer tops were transported by rail.
Sounds disgusting.
Yeah. Well, no, sewer tops mean
yeah, exactly.
for the roadways, you know, with putting out throughout the country.
I don't want anything that has a sewer involved with it.
Well, they had to get them to the cities from the foundry, so that was one of their choices for a gondola. But going back to the engines here, Lionel began to expand in the 1930s and pre-war 1940-42,
okay.
And after the war, continued on with the die-cast heavy, very heavy engines for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was die-cast, so they got a lot of detail out of it without having to put an awful lot of extra features on it. They used nickel for the rails and so forth. And if you're collecting these items, they are highly collectible. You can see that in Pennsylvania Railroad, they decided, well, maybe we ought to get with this Lionel stuff. So they put their Keystone logo on the front of this engine. And they also decided that they want a little more advertising. So they put a Pennsylvania Railroad signature on the tender of the turbine engine piece, a number 681, very popular, came out in sets.
Pennsylvania, that's what is
Pennsylvania
that?
Railroad.
Oh, that's the railroad.
That was
company?
considered the world's largest railroad, and still is, for that matter. Even though they have pared down and gone through various different mergers and things of that nature, but the Pennsylvania Railroad was considered the top railroad in the world in their heyday.
What's this? Train candy?
Train candy? No, this is artificial coal.
Artificial.
So in order for them to have an accurate depiction of what the trains were all about, they went to a fabricated, molded plastic coal tender so that kids weren't spilling coal all over the place.
No, that's not as much fun.
Well, it really isn't, except for the fact parents liked it.
Yeah,
But,
of course.
This is 120 years old.
What's
It's
in
hard
there?
to find these, all right,
What's
where
in
they're
it?
not ripped, torn, or anything, but there is coal inside.
You sure?
Yeah, oh, I'm sure.
Can you open it?
No,
Well,
that ruins
then,
ruins the value.
How do we know? It could
Well,
be just a bunch of pebbles or fish tank
No, it's
rocks.
the real deal, but for 120 years, I'm not going to attempt to open it, but you can feel it yourself. It's in there. And what I like about this, of course, is it's one of the early numbers that Lionel put out. This is a number 206 in the catalog.
Yeah,
And
I think you'd get real coal. Why we got to get artificial?
well, they knew at that time about artificial intelligence. So AI was back there, but they actually called it AC. So artificial coal, Lionel Corporation, New York, made in U.S. of America. Something that is,
That's
in my
not
opinion,
right. There's got to be a made in China sticker on there.
not a one. Not a one.
We don't make things here.
Well, unfortunately, today's world is a lot different. What I love about these, everything Lionel put out is made in the USA. And it was made in the USA. So as Lionel developed these engines, and they said, well, what can we do to fascinate kids who love to go and watch them for real? Well, they came out with smoke pellets.
Yeah.
On all of these engines, little white tablets that look like a Bayer aspirin.
There?
Yep, you put it right down the chimney. All right, and over here you'll see some residue. It's white, and they would smoke, which kids love that.
Well, what heats it up? Is there like electric in there or something?
Yes.
Just like a coil or something? that
Yes,
just
there's a
heats it?
coil, a heater coil in there, and it would actually create a warmth, and the tablet would disintegrate over time. They really lasted quite a while.
Incense burner almost.
Say again?
Incense burner almost.
Yes, very similar to an instant burn. Now, one of the things that for collector's purposes, what you want to look for if you're looking for these as a collection, you want to make sure that the engine has, because over time they get lost or knocked out. Notice the jewels on the front there, the green lights.
For the lights.
Correct. And you'll see here, this one is not quite complete.
Are they supposed to be both green?
Yes.
That one looks yellow.
No, well, it's someone at a long time ago tried to put something in it, but it's not accurate. Over here, you'll see a good set. So if you're looking at
Double
these,
green.
yes, and you also see over here on the turbine.
This guy doesn't have any.
No, this is too
No,
early.
this guy doesn't have any.
No, they didn't put marker lamps on the front of the turbine. They did put, however, the keystone for Pennsylvania
Some
Railroad.
kind of grill or something here too.
Yeah, that is an air intake for the turbine, and the turbine burned a little hotter, and so they had
got a
various
bell.
intakes.
It's
Got the bell.
What's that thing?
Found out the bell. That is a whistle.
Oh, that's the whistle.
Exactly, steam whistle. Steam was on through there, and you have the regular steam whistle.
And what's that switch?
That regulates whether or not the engine will start in forward, go to neutral, and then reverse on the next. If you want to get rid of that, then you move the little lever over. It'll only run in one direction. So that gave kids an opportunity to run it in one direction or have it back and forth. Now, the one thing that Lionel had to come out with was some way to make the trains whistle. That was a big fissure. Here is an example in the 1930s of a lithograph station.
That is a funny looking whistle.
Yep.
Yeah, blow on that thing?
Nope. You've got two. You've got 2 points for electrical contact in the back. All right. And then as you go forward, all right, you have a little tab here. Kids would push this down as the train went by, and it would whistle.
Where does it come out? The top?
Well, actually, the whistle was in the. Let's see if I can remove this. Inside, you have the whistle mechanism.
Oh yeah, it looks like I can see
Okay.
that.
And so that actually solved the problem of kids hearing the sound of the train. So they had the smoke, they had the whistle. All right. So as time went on, it was important that the train would go around the track and the kids didn't have to sit still and have it whistle at one spot. So they developed the whistle feature inside of the coal tenders. All right. So you have the whistle tender. And when they developed this, it was very successful because now kids would push a button on the transformer and the train would whistle as it went anywhere on the layout or around the room or around a Christmas tree. So it took away a lot of the pushing on a particular spot, and this is the only thing that would whistle, just this house. The train wouldn't. So, but it gave it some reality in regard to that. So when they came out with the whistling tender, then Lionel really hit the spot. So the kids would have more opportunity to use the whistle and see the train and hear the whistle at a distance, just like a real train. So that was a real big plus for Lionel. American Flyer followed suit some years later. And so now you have kids that have trains that smoke and they whistle. So that's a big feature. Then, as we developed these engines, they were sold pretty much in sets. And the sets then went from our lithograph cars, the metal cars, right now into mechanically operated cars, where in actuality over a magnetic spot in the track, the plunger would be pulled down when you automated the button, the door would open, and this little guy would throw packages out of the train.
Well, that doesn't seem safe.
Well, it didn't. It was stopped. Yeah, he wasn't getting rid of people's freight. It would have to have been stopped doing that, correct? Or we'd have had litter all over the. Which, by the way, about 3 years ago, when ships were backed up in Long Beach, California, and Union Pacific was trying to get all of the container freight out of there, vandals came along and unloaded a lot of the boxcars. They'd actually open them and throw stuff out of them. There's a classic picture that appeared, I think it was in a couple of magazines, where you see materials and all types of things that were being shipped all across the rail, just as you come out through the Los Angeles yards. Another nice feature was the milk car. So Lionel was beginning to get a lot of operating stuff at the time. Now, we had a situation where we looked ahead of time on icing. This little hatch would open, ice cubes would come in here, and if you looked at one of our episodes before, you saw the icing platform. Well, the little guy over here would push a little block of ice in here. When it was done, all right, that would keep the milk fresh. Then you'd pull up to a little unloading dock. The doors would open.
And they throw milk out like
and
a package guy?
The containers, the milk containers.
That's dangerous.
So the kid, well, it created whipped cream, all right, because they moved so much that the cream would go to the top of the container, right? So everything began to be automatic.
There's
automatic refrigerator. Say again?
Milk made in there? Or?
No cows, just containers of milk, and I'll show you a couple of those as we go along in another episode, all right? But we have to handle cattle, all right, on the rail, and here again you have a stock car, cattle car.
They're all gone.
Yeah, they're gone. It was offloaded. They added too much weight. And while I'm on the subject, take a look at something else that Lionel came out with on the trucks themselves. Okay, you see that this is called a staple truck. Looks like it's stapled from the inside out, and the two prongs of the staple were bent over. So Lionel went to this in the late 30s all the way through 40s. And even into the 50s and early 60s, and they were known as staple trucks.
What was the point?
Well, the point is that this was made out of die cast, and it was a heavy. As plastic began to be more economical, they molded the trucks in plastic. This is die cast metal.
Right.
So this required a stronger attachment point. So if you're looking at cars, you can generally tell their age, if you knew nothing else about it, by the trucks that they used at the time. Then we're going to go to our famous one from our last episode, We had the lithograph Baby Ruth.
Right.
Now, Lionel, it was very popular, went to the plastic ABS. And in this one, it's an early one, so you still see the staple truck. So this is about a 1930, 1940 piece. The brake wheel, a lot of people say, well, what's the brakeman do? When a car is released, this is the only way to control the car. And the brakeman would ride on the car, especially in a humping yard where they would separate the train, depending upon where different cars were going to be taken. And he could hold the car by turning the wheel, and that would apply the brake.
Down or applies the brake?
What happened was there's a chain that goes from the wheels. As you turn the wheel, it actually went into a brake shoe, just like the older cars from the 50s. They had brake shoes. They didn't have disc brakes.
But it basically just slows it down or stops it.
It'll stop it. It'll hold the car and it'll stop it. So when you're putting a train together, that came in very handy. And so the brakeman got his name from the fact that he was in charge of not only making sure that and we talked about this before, the bearings had journal caps on them. Okay, just a good example. And if they were not lubricated over long runs, the brakeman in the caboose could see smoke coming out of part of the train. He would signal the locomotive engineer to stop the train. Then he would go open the cap and make sure the fire was out so that it didn't spread wildfires because of the weeds that generally grew along the track.
Is that what happened? The weeds would get in
They'd
the
catch
wheels
on fire.
and they catch on fire?
Yep. And so riding in the caboose, he had an elevated view, all right? And since we're at the caboose at this point, this was a big kid feature, all right? The caboose was something that kids look forward to seeing at the end of the train. So Lionel, in their wise judgment, came out with various models of caboose. The brakeman would actually ride in the rear of the train.
Does he live in there?
Say again?
Is that his house?
Yeah, well, on the rail it was.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
He ate, he slept.
Only he goes in there, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And so he had an unobstructed view of the train as it went down the track, and then he would signal the locomotive engineer that we had a hot box. It was called a hot box. He would find it. He would then extinguish whatever flame or whatever. He would lubricate that so it wouldn't, again, friction would not heat that up. And it was very important for them to keep those journals lubricated at all times. So that was his job. He's the brakeman. He rode to the end of the train. Lionel came out with several different ones. Everybody likes a red caboose. But the New York Central Railroad came along and said, well, wait a second. You know, this is getting a lot of play. So they came along and said, look, I want Lionel, all right, to feature my railroad on their caboose. Here is still a Lionel feature, but New York Central came along and said, we want some play out of this because it's a rolling billboard. And as you can see here, New York Central began to become a player along with Lionel. So they actually paid a specific amount to be featured on their model cars. They felt it was good advertising for freight forwarders as well as passengers. So everybody kind of wanted to hop on this thing because at first there was some reluctance. They didn't know quite, is it an advertising tool or what might it be? Well, the kids were real big into it. And then, of course, the parents being part of the process, they once again associated the railroad logos with various cars. And when you'd see a train go by, kids would start identifying what railroad, you know, this particular car belonged to. So that's a pretty decent overview of what has transpired since the mid-1930s. The metal caboose here with a little bit of lithography on it, moving into the plastic ABS down in the mid-1940s, but it really began to catch on after World War II. And so Lionel went strictly to the plastic, and they still did the die-cast engines for the most part. So at that point, in today's work, we've covered a lot of ground. There are a lot of heroes of the rail, locomotive engineers, as well as everyone that worked on the railroad. one day in one of our episodes, we'll take a look at inside the shop. What was it like to maintain these gigantic machines?
Terrible.
And that would be quite an interesting point. So I'm going to bring it up to our bonus for today. And since we've been talking a lot about hot boxes on journals, here is something. This is about turn of the century, 1890s, 1900s.
It's like a grenade.
It kind of looks that way, doesn't it? But take a look at this.
Is that a lighter?
It looks like a lighter, but it's not. This is filled with kerosene. All right.
It's a Molotov.
In kerosene, and the brakeman, when he spotted something that the engineer needed attention for at night, this was filled with it was a personal item for the brakeman, and it was filled with kerosene. He would light this. No, he wouldn't say duck or anything like that, because he's all the way in the back of the train.
Right.
So he would signal, okay, that there's something that he needs to stop the train. So it became a night signal prior to having lanterns that were electrified. So this is a very early example of a night torch, night flare, night
still
light.
work?
Yes, it does. It, well, we're talking about 120, 125 years. This was soon replaced by lanterns, handheld lanterns, that I will do on another episode. But this is an unusual item. You don't see much of these, but it was useful. Little canister, kerosene. Kerosene was a big deal because even in most homes, kerosene heaters up to the 1950s, 1960s were still popular for heating homes, especially here in Florida. You know, we did have winters. The house I grew up in had a fireplace. We have since moved away a little bit from cold weather, but we do get our cold weather down here. But this item was indispensable. It's almost like if you're out on a boat, you would need a strobe light or something in the event of emergency. And this signaled the engineer that there's a problem with the train, and then the engineer would take action and slow the train down until they could finally figure out what it was. But this was the hand signal at that time, and things have changed a lot, and we'll go through that on our next episode. Take another look at some of the kerosene lanterns that brakemen used to use to signal all the way to the front of the train.
Okay. That's good.
So, we'll look forward to seeing you on our next episode, and we'll carry the Lionel history on into the mid-1950s, and one of the most popular things that Lionel was responsible for was the Santa Fe set, the Santa Fe colors, and the Santa Fe Railroad. Amazing marketing tool. Every kid in the world wanted the big silver and red Santa Fe diesel engines. So we're in a phase now going into it in the mid-50s where we're getting a little bit less steam and a little bit more introduction of diesel to the American railroads. Happy 4th of July.
Okay.
We'll see you off the rails on our next episode.
All right. Good.